If you've spent any time in the dating or relationship world, you've probably seen lists of red flags that claim to tell you exactly when to run. Things like if they don't text back within an hour, then move on, it's a red flag. Or if they don't post you on social media, that's a red flag. Or if they cancel plans twice, red flag. The problem is real life is a little bit more complicated and messier than that. Everyone has stress, everyone has schedules, and everyone has flaws. And sometimes people get it wrong. So if we treated one little misstep as a deal breaker, no relationship would make it past the first month. And that's why spotting red and green flags is not about finding the perfect partner. It's about paying attention to patterns over a time. So do their actions create a sense of relational safety and relational trust? Or do they repeatedly erode that trust and leave you feeling small? So when we start to look at flags in this way, we get something much more valuable than a checklist. We get a window into whether or not we're compatible. By the way, I'm Kaylee Larkin, and I help people to break free from anxious attachment patterns and attract the secure and fulfilling relationships that they desire. So for people with anxious attachment style, this topic is especially important because anxious attachment style can show up as a kind of scanning for danger. And that means that you might notice every little inconsistency, every pause in a text thread, every tone shift during a conversation, because the nervous system interprets those little moments as a potential abandonment. And suddenly someone's mind can start to spin with stories like, did I do something wrong? Are they not into me anymore? Are they losing interest? And then on the other end of the spectrum, anxious attachment can also lead to idealizing somebody. So there might be that initial connection, that feeling of being chosen, and that can feel so powerful that then red flags might get overlooked or just rationalized away. And both of these tendencies, the tendency to overreact to little signals and then to overlook really big signals, those both make it harder to see what's actually happening. So that's why it's really important to understand red and green flags in a nuanced way. That helps you to stay grounded so that you're not panicking at every hiccup, and then you're also not ignoring serious patterns that don't work for you. So green flags are not about perfection. Let's start with the positives. A green flag doesn't mean that someone always says the right thing or that they, never drop the ball. It means that overall, their way of relating, it builds safety and mutual respect. And so some examples could be that they're willing to admit when they're wrong and they really try to make it right. Or they show genuine curiosity about your needs and your experiences. Or their actions really tend to match their words. And even if they mess up, they show some effort to repair. So notice that none of these require someone to be perfect. They're just about that willingness to relate, to follow through. And green flags are about someone's orientation towards growth and connection. So red flags, on the other hand, we want to look for repeated patterns. They're not single mistakes. Everyone zones out during a conversation sometimes, and then they have to come back and focus. So what really makes something a red flag is when the pattern repeats. You bring up something and they immediately dismiss you, and they do that repeatedly. Or they consistently dismiss your feelings instead of trying to understand them. Or they promise change, but then they just keep repeating the same hurtful behaviors that are having this huge impact on you. Or they make you responsible for their comfort, and then they don't really offer anything in return. So red flags are about what happens after the mistake. Do they take accountability? Do they move towards repair? Or do they turn it all around onto you? So let's look at some real life scenarios and make these some, down to earth situations that you're likely to run into when dating. So the first scenario is texting after a date. So say someone's just had a really good first date. The next day, they're waiting for a text. So a red flag pattern would be the person just disappears for a few days and then pops back in with no acknowledgement. And when you ask about it, they get defensive or they suggest that you're just being too demanding. The green flag pattern would be that they might not be glued to their phone, but they communicate their availability. Like, this week is busy, but I'll call you on Thursday. If they drop the ball, then they circle back with some acknowledgement. And this matters because consistency shows whether someone's valuing the connection. So whether they value building a connection with you, even in these little ways. Another scenario would be when you bring up a concern. So say you felt brushed off during a conversation and you decide to mention it. So the red flag pattern would be they roll their eyes, or they change the subject, or they make you feel silly for being upset. A green flag pattern would be they might not agree right away, that's okay, but they are willing to stay present. Maybe they ask a clarifying question, or they take some time to reflect and they come back to it later. And this matters because the ability to stay engaged during a relational discomfort is going to indicate that relational safety. Another scenario would be making plans. So say you've been talking for a while and you're trying to set up another date. And a red flag pattern would be they keep things pretty vague, like, oh, we'll see, or they cancel repeatedly, or they leave you unsure about when you're going to meet up. The green flag pattern is life might happen and they cancel, but then they reschedule. They make concrete plans that show some follow through. And this reliability builds that foundation of trust that's so important when you're just getting to know somebody. Another scenario would be expressing needs. So you tell them you'd appreciate some more regular check-ins. The red flag pattern to that is they accuse you of being needy, or they make you feel guilty for even asking. The green flag pattern is they may not be able to meet that need perfectly, but they're curious and they want to know more about what you need and how to help you feel connected. And this matters because a willingness to understand your perspective signals collaboration. It doesn't signal dismissal. And if you like, drop a comment about this. So which of these 4 scenarios feels most familiar to you? And one more scenario, handling conflict after an argument. So say something comes up that's important. The red flag pattern is they shut down, they stonewall, they escalate into insults, and they have a focus on winning, not repairing. The green flag pattern is conflict still happens, but it's followed by attempts to repair, like an apology or a softening or an effort to find middle ground. And keep in mind that, of course, if there's a scenario where we're dealing with personality disorders or, extreme narcissism, then sometimes it's important to keep those boundaries. However, in general, when we're working on building relationships, then we really want to focus on repair. And conflict is going to come up. So this is important because conflict can either be destructive or constructive. So let's talk about somatic awareness and spotting flags. Remember, somatic is indicating the body. So sometimes the clearest signals don't come from something that they said. They come from how your body feels when you're with them. Because our nervous systems are constantly scanning for safety. So they're constantly scanning for connection. So when you've had anxious attachment patterns, your system might be tuned to pick up on danger quickly or mistake that unpredictability for excitement. I talk about that a lot in these videos. And so this is where somatic awareness becomes a really powerful tool. So instead of just asking, what did they say or do? This is where you also check in with, okay, how do I feel in my body around them? And here are some cues to notice. Like, I'm going to check in. Okay, do I feel a steady sense of ease in my chest? Do I notice a tightness in my back muscles that just doesn't let go? So little things in the body that can tell us whether or not it feels like a safe interaction. So when you leave an interaction, do you feel calmer and more centered, or do you feel more unsettled? In moments of conflict, can your breath return to normal around them, or does your body just stay locked in this fight or flight response? So, for example, say you're on a date with somebody new, they're charming, they're funny, you're having a great conversation, really relating well, but then afterwards, your stomach feels knotted and you can't quite relax. Okay, so that's information. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're unsafe, but it's a signal that is worth paying attention to. So contrast that with a date where you feel really grounded, where it feels really easy to, laugh, it feels light, and then you leave and your shoulders actually feel lower than when you arrived. You feel more relaxed and and good than when you got there. That's a green flag at the nervous system level. And this is important because somatic awareness cuts through the stories that an anxious mind might create. So you might rationalize behavior like, they're just busy, I shouldn't need so much. But then your body's telling you something else. Your body's telling you that there's some inconsistency and to pay attention. And so listening to those signals helps to balance the head and the heart. So here's a reflection exercise that somebody could do around this. So after spending time with someone, just pausing and asking oneself a couple of simple questions. So in the body, asking like, how does my body feel right now? And then in the mind, asking, okay, are my thoughts calmer or are they busy? Are they spinning? Does it feel like I need to figure something out? And then noticing the energy. Do I feel more expansive or more contracted? So more expansive, relaxed, or more contracted, on edge. And over time, these little check-ins can help us distinguish between anxiety-driven attraction and genuine compatibility that's going to lead to a healthy, sustainable relationship. So here's how we might integrate somatic awareness with red and green flags. A green flag isn't just about the behavior. It's about how the consistency shows up in the body. So do we notice our breath deepen as we're relaxing around somebody? Does it feel safer to speak up? A red flag might show up as a persistent bodily sense of unease, even when we can't put it into words. And the key isn't to stress out about the sensation, it's just to start to notice the pattern that that sensation is connected to over time. So I'm curious, when you've paid attention to your body in dating and relationships, what signals have you noticed? And go ahead and share in the comments if you would like to, because it helps other people to see that they're not the only ones. So here's where it gets really important. A red flag for you may not be a red flag for someone else. So for instance, if you need regular check-ins and they prefer long stretches of independence where they're doing their own thing, that might not mean that either of you is wrong. It might just mean that you're not compatible to date. So compatibility is less about labeling someone else as unhealthy. It's more about just checking in, okay, does their way of relating match mine? And does it help me to feel calm and clear? Or does it cause me to feel anxious and confused? And this is how we avoid that anxious avoidant kind of trap. So you might meet someone who's kind and caring, but not able to give the consistency that you need. That doesn't mean that they're a villain. It just means your needs and their way of showing up just don't match. And when you focus on that compatibility rather than labeling, it becomes easier to walk away without self-blame and without blaming the other person. So to reflect on this, as we think about dating and relationship patterns, there's some questions that we can ask around this. So when have I felt calm and steady with somebody? What were they doing that supported me in feeling that way? And then on the flip side, when have I felt anxious or confused? And what was contributing to that? And how do I want someone to respond when I share a need or concern with them? Am I paying more attention to one amazing moment or to the overall pattern? And if you would like, drop some of your answers to these reflection questions in the comments. What's one green flag that you've experienced that made you feel calmer and more at ease when you were dating? So spotting red and green flags is less about making snap judgments, and it's more about gathering information. It's more about noticing someone's patterns and how they help you to feel safe, valued, and respected. Because remember that everyone will get it wrong sometimes. We're all human. But what matters is, how do they respond afterwards? Do they lean in and repair, or do they dismiss and deflect? And is that a repeated pattern? So at the end of the day, compatibility is not about finding someone's flaws. It's about finding someone whose way of relating matches closely enough to our own so that we can build a life with them. And when you can spot patterns without jumping to extremes, you give yourself the gift of clarity. And that clarity helps us to build confidence in love. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What helps you tell the difference between a temporary mistake and a real red flag pattern? Because this is something that's very important for people with anxious attachment. And I'd love to hear your take on this. So if you'd like more support, if you've recognized some of your own anxious patterns, While listening to this, you don't have to figure it all out on your own. The Secure Love Toolkit was created specifically to help people with anxious attachment style to shift into clarity and calm confidence in dating. And inside, you'll learn how to identify red and green flags with more ease, get clear on what a secure relationship looks like for you, because it's individual, and shift your energy so that you naturally attract more secure and steady partners. And this helps you to feel calmer and more confident in your dating choices. So it's a set of practical tools that you can start using right away to get your head and heart in the right space for secure love. So you can get instant access in the description for this video, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you got something from it, feel free to drop a comment and let me know what resonated. I love hearing what resonated for you, and I hope to see you in the next one. This is Kaylee Larkin, wishing you a beautiful relational journey.